Jane Logie.
E te tiamana tēnā koe, kia koutou huri noa e te whare tēnā koutou katoa. Ka tū o mō nā kakariki ki te kōrero e te tō tohe toi o nā whakatau tata e pā ana nā take te manatū whakahiato ora. So I rise to take a call on estimates for the Ministry of Social Development, and this is one of the largest ministries with the largest budgets overall. And I would say most people in this House would recognise that this is the ministry that is critically important for our demonstration of how much we care or don't about our fellow New Zealanders. This is the ministry that is responsible for ensuring people are housed and have access to warm, dry homes. This is the ministry that's responsible for funding our community organisations that have developed over so many years in response to community needs. This is the ministry that's responsible for protecting and looking after people who are unable to be in paid work, who are caring for people that need 24-hour care, family members who have disabilities, people who have disabilities themselves who are unable to get into the paid workforce, people who are sick and unable to work, people with cancer, parents who are leaving violent relationships, who are trying to establish themselves and their children in a safe environment. People have been made redundant. So this is some of the functions of this ministry. So it is incredibly important that this House spends the proper time looking at the government's performance, because it matters. These people who are in the care of us all, their lives matter. So I would like to particularly just touch on a few. There are so many things to cover, but I will briefly touch on housing and recognise that while there's been much discussion about homelessness and a huge amount of public concern, and we've heard that the government, well, in fact, they've put out a video titled Comprehensive Plan to prove that they have a comprehensive plan, that what we've seen in this government, in this budget, is that there is still money in this budget to sell state houses, while we have people sleeping on our streets all around this country. We have 1 in 100 New Zealanders without a secure home of their own, where we know our hospitals are clogged up with our children and particularly our elderly who are sick and dying from the overcrowding in this country and the standard or lack of standards in our housing. And then we have the government, in response to the absolute public outrage over the situation of homelessness in this country, the government saying, oh, okay, well, we're going to give people 7 days in a motel that we'll pay for. We can only give them 7 days because actually there are so many people in need that we can't cover more than that. So we'll only be responsible for 7 days, even though as a government we need to take, or this government should take responsibility for the lack of housing, that they're only going to take responsibility as far as 7 days. And then we know, we've just heard conflicting numbers from this government. They can't even come into this House and give us one figure of how long it takes to people to get into housing. We've had 7 days, we've had 10 days, we've had 155 days coming from this government. The basics of responsible governance, and they can't step up and meet those basic standards. So, and I believe that actually there's a point to that, because it makes it more confusing for the public and it makes it easier for them to refuse to take responsibility, and it's shameful. And when I asked the Minister in the Select Committee hearing about why this is only the policy that they've instituted now going forward, when they know that there's a significant number of people who have extraordinary amounts of debt, who are out of work at the moment, who have already racked up, some people over $100,000 worth of debt. Mr. Chair.
Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So over $100,000 worth of debt to work and income to be able to put a roof over the head. The minister's response was, the government is not interested in knowing. It is looking forward, not back. The government is not interested in knowing how many people have racked up debt that they're going to be left with for their lives because of this government's failure. And I will just remind this House that after the Christchurch earthquake, the Green Party stood in this House and said that this is the government's, we need to actually train people and start a state house building program in Auckland so that we can have the people in the country to be ready to build in Christchurch when they come online. The country would be in a different position now if we had a government that was proactive rather than continually expecting the market to deliver when there is clear market failure. I would also like now to touch on my deep concern around another aspect of social development funding in this budget. And it is, in more detail, I'd like to talk about this very small but significant issue, which is that this budget shows no increase in funding for women's refuges. And we've heard from the government that family violence, domestic violence is a priority for them. But they have put no more money in this budget for our women's refuges. And when I asked the minister about why there wasn't new money, she said that funding had not increased for refuges because the government wants more information on their effectiveness. And that she told us, the minister told us about an alternative idea, which we've got to assume is an alternative idea to refuges, of taking perpetrators out of the family home rather than women and children. Now, I really want to put on record in this House, those things are not one or the other. Those things, we need both of them in our society. Women's refuges, the only reason that we have legislation on domestic violence is because women in our communities came together and set up women's refuges on the belief that women had the right to be physically safe and emotionally safe. The entire understanding of domestic violence in this country comes from women's refuges. They do much more than just put a roof over people's heads. They are there on the phones, in person, with women to talk through the safety in their relationships, whether they leave or not. They are there doing the healing work between the mothers and the children, which we know is actually the heart of what enables them to move forward in life and stop the cycle of violence. For the minister to say that she is even questioning their effectiveness, to me, shows a complete ignorance of the role of women's refuges, particularly when I've surveyed 20 of them, and most of those refuges, the majority, hadn't had a funding increase in 8 years, that they have been cutting services and cutting staff because their funding is currently inadequate. We've heard of an area where there were 1,500 police reports going to a refuge and they had $17,000 a year supposedly expected to cover them following up those 1,500 police reports. Now, if there's any question of their effectiveness, it's only because government has run down their funding to an extent that they're not able to fully function. And that is putting the safety of our women and children and our communities absolutely at risk, and it should not be allowed. And the minister needs to review her entire thinking on this issue and step up and put some funding into the safety, protective factors in our communities, and refuge is very much one of those. Now, there are so many things to talk about, Mr. Chair. I would like to just, in this short period of time now, to talk about another very, very important issue, which is the social investment approach and funding for people who are unable to work. And recognise that,
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
The honourable drop for the next one.